Derek had just thrown the man out, but as the door slammed shut, something inside him snapped. He froze, fists clenched, feeling he'd made a mistake. Moments later, he was chasing the man down the street. What happened next would change everything. But let's start from the beginning. It was a quiet Thursday evening at Al's Grill, a modest family-owned restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown New York. The usual hum of conversation and clinking cutlery filled the air, the perfect setting for Officer Derek Harris, a man known for his strict demeanor and no-nonsense approach, to unwind after a long shift. He was tired, hungry, and simply wanted to enjoy a meal in peace. Derek slid onto a bar stool at the counter, glancing at the menu with little interest. His mind was elsewhere, on the day's events, the case files waiting for him at home, and the city's endless pulse. But then his gaze shifted. A figure had entered the restaurant. A young black man, Marcus, dressed casually in a hoodie and sneakers. He seemed out of place, his movements slow as he made his way to an empty corner table. Derek didn't know why, but something about Marcus unsettled him. Maybe it was the hoodie, the way the young man looked too comfortable for the setting. Or maybe it was the fact that Derek had seen him hanging around the block earlier. Something in him flared. He didn't want to deal with this. Not tonight. Without thinking, Derek stood up. His boots thudded heavily on the floor as he approached. "Excuse me, you need to leave," he said, his voice sharp, a command rather than a request. The bustling noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as the other diners turned their heads, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus looked up, clearly startled. His face showed confusion, then a flash of irritation. "What do you mean?" "I just sat down," he replied, voice steady but edged with disbelief. Derek's expression hardened. He didn't hesitate. "This is a private establishment. I don't want to see you here," he snapped. The words came out before he had fully processed why he felt so strongly about this. Maybe it was the young man's disheveled appearance. Maybe it was the fact that Derek had seen him loitering outside earlier. Or maybe it was just the fact that he didn't want any trouble tonight. Marcus felt a wave of indignation rise within him. He wasn't the type to let someone push him around, especially not for no reason. "You can't kick me out like this. I've got every right to be here," he shot back, his voice rising. But Derek wasn't backing down. He pointed towards the door, his hand firm, his voice colder than before. "Leave. Now." For a brief moment, the tension between them hung in the air, thick and unyielding. The restaurant had gone completely still. Neither man moved. But as Marcus stood there, glaring at Derek, something inside the officer's chest tightened. He didn't know why, but in that instant, he realized. This was going to be worse than he thought. As Marcus stepped out of the restaurant, the door slammed shut behind him with a sharp, almost violent finality. The sound seemed to linger in the cool evening air, echoing in his chest like a cruel reminder of the humiliation he'd just endured. He kept his head down, walking quickly, trying to ignore the sting in his eyes. Passers-by glanced his way, some more boldly than others, and Marcus could feel their judgment, their curiosity burning into his back. It wasn't the first time he'd felt this way. He didn't need to look up to know that every step he took was being watched. Why was it always like this? His mind raced as he moved down the street, the anger bubbling inside him. Was it because of the way I looked? His thoughts spiraled, the harsh words Derek had thrown at him replaying over and over. Or was it just that I didn't stand a chance in a world where my skin color was a constant liability? Inside Al's Grill, the air felt thick with discomfort, like a room full of people suddenly unsure of where to look. Derek returned to his seat at the counter, but something inside him didn't settle right. He stared at the door for a moment, the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall filling the silence. The uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at him like an unshakable itch. He'd been so sure of himself earlier, so certain that he was in the right. But now, something didn't feel right. What had I done? The self-assurance that had pushed him to act so decisively just moments ago now seemed like an illusion. Carla, the waitress, had been watching the whole scene unfold from behind the counter. She walked over to Derek, her steps quiet, the soft clink of her apron the only sound that broke the silence. She stood beside him, her expression serious, her voice low but firm. "Derek, you know that wasn't right, don't you?" Derek's brow furrowed, a flash of defensiveness rising in him. He was making everyone uncomfortable, he muttered, but his words lacked conviction, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Carla's eyes didn't waver. "No, Derek, you were." Her voice didn't shake, didn't falter. It was steady, sure, like she'd been holding this truth inside her for a while. For a long moment, Derek just sat there, stunned. Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The righteous confidence he had felt moments before seemed to evaporate, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that wrapped around him, tightening with each passing second. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, and for the first time in a long while, Derek wasn't so sure of his actions. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Derek could not shake the image of Marcus's face, hurt, confused, and angry. He had acted out of impulse, perhaps too quickly. But was that enough to make it right? Should he go after the man? Apologize? Could he even apologize in a meaningful way? Derek stood up, his stomach a tangle of nerves. He walked to the door, stepping outside into the chilly evening air. There, at the curb, he saw Marcus, walking away, his shoulders slumped, as if carrying a weight too heavy for one person. "Hey!" Derek called out, his voice softer now, no longer authoritative. Marcus turned around slowly, an edge of disbelief in his eyes. "What do you want?" I owe you an apology," Derek said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He had never had to apologize for something like this before. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he shook his head. "I don't need your apology, but maybe next time, think before you act." Derek stood there, watching as Marcus continued to walk down the street. The police officer was no longer sure of who he had been in that moment. But one thing was clear. His actions had consequences, and he had to live with them. Back inside the restaurant, Carla was waiting. She didn't say anything, but Derek could see the question in her eyes. Did he do the right thing? "Next time," Derek said quietly, more to himself than to her, "I'll think first." As he sat back down at the counter, he realized something that he hadn't known before. It wasn't just about the authority he had, it was about understanding. And that realization would stay with him long after the night ended.